Hi, I'm Spencer Krause. I've been building robots for over 20 years. In that time, I've seen a lot of interesting things, and I've heard a lot of interesting stories. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is a place where my peers and I can relax, have a drink, and talk about some of the crazier things we've seen at work and some of the experiences we've had that have gotten us to where we are today. Subscribe today to join the collaboration. Welcome to the Collaborative Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Krause. Our guest today is Chris Luecke. Chris is the podcast host and founder of the Manufacturing Happy Hour. Chris, welcome to the pod.
Great to be here, Spencer. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I had a really good time meeting you at the A3 Business Forum. That was a fun event. And just hit it off right away. Happy to be your friend and also really happy to be interviewing you.
I admittedly I was struck by the name Ska Robotics right out of the gate, because as a longtime punk rock and music fan, like that's where my head goes right when I hear that name. But that was a fun time. Can I share something I remember from that evening as well? A fun little anecdote. We were exchanging business cards, and this is a little pop culture reference. I forget what it was. We were talking about the texture of our business cards and things like that. You have a really nice one, and you said, "Let's see Paul Allen's card," which I cracked up when I heard that, because for the folks of you out there that are listening that know the reference, it's from American Psycho, and it's an iconic scene where basically these New York investment bankers are exchanging business cards and getting very much into the details about who has the nicer card.
But they look identical. They're very much constrained by their style guidelines, where there's no discernible difference to the viewer. And so that was what made that scene so good in my mind.
It's an absolute riot. Anyway, I was very impressed by your pop culture reference that does not come up in nearly enough business card exchanges.
You would be amazed by how many times that joke has fallen flat. I think I've had more people be like, "Huh," than get it when I've ripped that out.
I think it's one of those that it's a good joke, because the downside of someone not understanding it is pretty low. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know Paul Allen was here," or whatever, right? But the upside of them getting it is just through the roof.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I mean, like I said, most people don't. So I was tickled pink that you got it, and I was like, this guy's the best.
But between American Psycho references and ska references, it was a great first introduction at the A3 Business Forum.
Oh, and you introduced me to Athletic Brewing Company, which makes really, really good non-alcoholic beer. I'm like, wow, this stuff has come a long way since when you had to drink O'Doul's to have a beer in your hand without getting drunk. I was like, this is awesome.
As someone that has been running a beer-driven podcast since basically 2016, I too appreciate the onset of flavorful, authentic, non-alcoholic beers. It allows me to continue to do. It allows me to do my job without always having to have a let's call it a real beer in hand, if you will.
Yeah. No, I mean that's awesome, right? And I don't know, I'm drinking a whiskey. It's become kind of, something I do a lot on the podcast, but I feel like I don't know, I don't always want to get, buzz. So it's I also always try to have a water just so I don't feel the need to reach for it,
I'm drinking out of my mystery glass tonight. It's my tumbler. Sometimes it has a beverage, sometimes it has coffee, sometimes it has water in it. It's I get the joke oftentimes. It's like, "Hey Chris, is that beer in your glass at 9 a.m.? It's like, guys, I'm a business owner, not an alcoholic. Come on. So, but that is one of the nice things about recording post 5 p.m. is the beverage option is very much available.
Yeah, well, and I mean, for me at least, if I've just had a really long day, which is every day, it tends to be 12 hours, and then I do these recordings after that. It's I don't know. I wouldn't. It's nice to have a whiskey, to kind of,
I don't blame you, man. Well, cheers. It's great to have a beverage with you this evening, Spencer.
So we started getting into it. Speaking of the beer theme, you worked for a brewery early in your career, and so I noticed that on your LinkedIn. I thought it was cool. Did that shape your brand? Is that how you got like the beer theme going, or was it more than that, or like how does it play in?
It's certainly not accidental that
It was
my
Anheuser Busch, right?
it was Anheuser Busch, yeah. So for context, I am from St. Louis originally, live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin now. I've moved around a bit, but originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and landing an engineering co-op at Anheuser Busch was like the coolest thing a St. Louis kid could do in 2007. So that was my very first, we'll call it what it was, my very first engineering job. I was a process engineering co-op, really more of a project engineer while I was there. I was helping them manage some capital projects. Funny enough, not for the brewery itself, but for a division of the company called Metal Container Corporation.
Huh.
So
Is that what it
Anheuser-Busch.
sounds like? You're just making kegs?
No, not making kegs, making aluminum
Oh,
cans.
cool.
There was an element to vertical integration at Anheuser-Busch. I forget the exact story, but they started their own aluminum can division of the company, so that way they'd have visibility to the process and more than likely, more importantly, the cost of what it takes to make cans. So that way they could negotiate with their other suppliers saying, hey, we're buying this many cans from you. We know how much it takes to make. So they have the in-house resource as well as some leverage with the external resources as well. So I was
I'm sure their
working
vendors
on,
love that.
I mean, you know what? When you're a company like that and you can vertically integrate a part of your company and provide some of the raw materials you need to bottle your beer, more power to you.
Oh, for sure.
Right. But it like long story short, incredible experience. Absolutely loved it there. One of the funny aspects was my first co-op stint where, you alternate school and work. So it's like a semester getting real world experience, then a semester back in the classroom at Marquette, where I went to school in
Oh,
Milwaukee.
cool. That's a great school.
It was a great time, but my first stint there, I wasn't 21 yet, so I couldn't take advantage of like the free beer perk of working at Anheuser-Busch until I went back for my round 2 stint as a co-op, where then I got more of an ample supply of free Bud Light and Budweiser.
Oh, that's awesome.
Before I really spent most of my career in sales after that, at another organization, but certainly, and it was just really cool working for the brewery. My grandpa, on my dad's side, he and his brothers had worked for Anheuser-Busch as well. Just a lot of St. Louis heritage there. So
Awesome.
it was cool. It was cool to work with them right before they got bought out by InBev. So I kind of got that last dose of what it was like when they were a pure American manufacturer.
That's awesome. Is InBev like, I wasn't aware of that acquisition or familiar with it. Like, where are they based out of?
InBev, I believe it's Belgium.
Oh, cool.
But funny enough, when that
Belgians make
acquisition
such good beer.
they do. So Stella Artois would be InBev's largest international brand.
That makes sense, and they're
Yeah.
selling volume on that. I mean, everybody drinks
Yeah.
Stella Artois all over the world. Same with
Yes.
Bud Light. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was InBev's big portfolio brand before they got Anheuser-Busch into their family as well. Yeah, that took place in 2008, summer 2008. I remember because I was working there at the time, and I was there when the acquisition went through, and I wasn't there during the times to notice the changes, but certainly management style, a very lean organization, things evolved after that. Obviously the company has stabilized since then, right? Now the culture is it is what it is now and things like that. But long story short, it was just a really cool spot to start, a place that had that type of pride in the product they made. You could see it in the manufacturing facilities. We talk about dull, dirty, dangerous in manufacturing sometimes in
Sure.
terms of what the general perception of the industry is. I have never worked in a manufacturing facility that had any of that, because the Anheuser-Busch facilities were pristine. In my Rockwell days, they had a very similar type of pride. It was just well organized, well executed. So my perceptions of manufacturing, I got lucky. I worked with a couple really world-class organizations before I started doing my own thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really, really cool. Did you know that Collaborative with Spencer Krause now has a merch store? Please go to cwskmerch.com for the latest in CWSK styles. You can get a hoodie, like the one I'm wearing, t-shirts, hell, we even have whiskey glasses. Everything in the store has custom art that our team worked really, really hard on. So go ahead and show your support for them, me, and the rest of the CWSK team by going to cwskmerch.com today. Better yet, support yourself and use discount code podcast10, all one word, all uppercase, for 10% off your entire order. Thanks for your support and enjoy the rest of the show. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is sponsored by SKA Robotics. If you're in the market for elite field robotics expertise, please consider hiring SKA Robotics. They sponsor this podcast and solve some of the toughest engineering problems in the world. SKA Robotics can be found at skarobotics.com. What were some of the things that kind of set Rockwell apart? It sounds like, pride of ownership, like cleanliness, just doing a really good job. But what was their vibe?
During my time there, it was certainly the culture. I've Rockwell always, all of my managers were always very invested in my career, seeing me succeed, seeing where they wanted me to get to, wherever I wanted to get to, whether that was my sales goals, whether that was advancing in the company, or geographically. Like, I started my career in Rockwell's Houston office. I was there for about 4 years, but it was no secret. Like, I kind of wanted to get to the West Coast at some point and work out there. So when an opportunity came up in San Francisco,
nice,
my local team was the first to advocate for me to interview and go after and ultimately get that next role. But maybe the thing that sticks out most about, to put a tangible lesson around, hey, the culture was great. What does it mean when someone says the culture is great at an organization? In the case of Rockwell, and specifically when I was at the Houston office, there you had like your OEM sales team selling to equipment manufacturers. You had your end user sales team selling, to the end users. And then you had your channel team, which was really working with the distributor and the channel partner. So you had these 3 different teams, and there was a different sales manager for each team. And regardless who I was reporting to at the time, I knew each of the different sales managers had their different strengths. So if I needed someone to engage with me that just had a really good understanding of like financial selling, if you will, I knew who to turn to for that. If I needed advice as a guy that was in my 20s, I knew to turn to the manager that was really good at developing young career talent. If I needed someone who was analytical, I knew to go to that sales manager.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was a really important, like, now that I look back on it, it was important for a couple of reasons. One, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and a good team, you'll know who to go to for, to leverage people's strengths. And, the other thing was just, I think the kind of in the same vein, but like the importance of having a diverse team with diverse skill sets. So that way, you're not just relying on one monochromatic individual, who to turn to based on people's different experiences and the way they go about organizing and running their businesses.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. That mentorship is huge, but especially early career, but even, I don't know. Do you have advisors and mentors now that you go to?
Yeah, I do. And it's a range, right? Some of them are people I met during my Rockwell days, for example. Others are folks that are leaders in the Milwaukee tech scene where I live now.
Cool.
My rules around mentorship, if I were to turn this into like actionable advice for the listeners, I always look for mentors that have a skill or a strength that I don't want to develop, that I haven't developed yet, or maybe I've partially developed it and I want to get better at it. For example, in my sales career, like folks that were just really good at diagnosing a customer's problem. I would shadow them because I wanted to ask better questions that allowed me to develop deeper relationships that ultimately could lead to bigger sales. So that's one thing, looking for someone, and that's probably the most common one, looking for someone that has a skill set you want to develop that you can kind of tap into and shadow them and learn from their knowledge. That's one way to develop a mentor relationship. The other way is, and this is more rare just because it's got to be the right type of person, but if you see someone that is where they are in their career, like 5 to 10 to 20 years down the line, where you're like, gosh, in 5 to 10 to 20 years, I wouldn't mind being similar to that person or having a similar role to them, well, hey, absolutely develop a relationship with that person, because then it's not just a skill, but it's almost like, some of the things they've accomplished in life, their values, the type of work they're doing that all their efforts have led up to. Then you can really tap into that. So those are my pieces of advice around building those mentor relationships.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, that's been invaluable to me as well. And, I mean, yeah, when I'm building up a mentor relationship, I mean, I also look at, like, who do I want to emulate? Like, who do I want to be more like? Who's doing stuff that I really look up to? I took an interesting step a year ago, and I announced SKA Robotics' advisory board. And so it's all on the website. Well, there's probably like more unofficial advisors that aren't on the advisory board than ones that are listed. But there's some interesting ones. So we've got Brian Beyer, who runs Hellbender Inc. We've got Kristen Stanton, who's the chief operating officer at that ad agency I used to work for, Deep Local. There's Rick Allen, who is the VP of business development at RE Squared. There's Louisa Michaels, who's the CFO at the Advanced Robotics Manufacturing Institute. And then Steve Raiola is the new one. So he'll be going to his first advisory board meeting with us tomorrow. I'm really excited for that. Litigation attorney, it's his first advisory board, but he's super brilliant strategically. And he was one where I was on the fence. Sorry, Steve, if you're listening, but he just was able to really strategize on a few things I was having trouble with and just figure them out. And, his brain is so sharp and honed and focused. I'm excited to see what he comes up with in the context of the advisory board. So,
yeah, I think having someone that's an attorney or has an attorney background is a very underrated strategy for like having someone on your advisory board. They're going to look at things a little differently, I would assume. And the fact that you had some tangible experiences where that individual helped you through some specific scenarios, all the more reason to put them on there. I actually think that's a great idea. Probably the most underrated piece of advice you just shared there is having an advisory board, because I think a lot of young companies, a lot of young founders, if you will, probably have like an unofficial advisory board, but to publish it, I think is a pretty cool trick.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a marketing advisor who taught me that. So
yeah, there you go.
I was never going to do it. I had unofficial advisors for years, and she was like, "You should publish your advisory board," and I was like, all right." And she was totally right. Like people love it.
Yeah, no, it's a slick move. I'll need to check that out later after the interview.
Oh, you should absolutely publish your advisory board. So
I need to formalize mine a little bit more. I need to figure out who's on there, get the buy-in, but that's a great idea, especially as I'm going through a website upgrade as we speak.
Awesome.
And the fact that you've got that quarterly cadence, you've got them invested in your organization. Awesome tip to learn from.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad that you've got, strong advisors as well. I mean, it's so important. And, I mean, one of the bits of feedback I've gotten, not to harp on this too much, is, like, I'm told I'm coachable, which I don't think everyone is. And I can tell you are too. Like, you seem like you don't have such a big ego that you're, off-putting to people that help you and make you smarter and stronger as a person.
I asked one of my managers that point blank one time. Not point blank. Like, it was, we were like having a rough quarter, and I just needed like some sort of affirmation, right? And I'm just like, what's one thing that's going well right now? And he's like, "You're super coachable." Like,
I love that.
Well, I mean, it's like, and I think of there's a player, I forget who he's playing for now. He might be retired, but Steven Adams, New Zealand basketball player. He was playing for the Oklahoma City Thunder for a long time, and I remember when he got traded away, like, he wasn't the best player on the team. He was really good, but he was like a fan favorite, just personality, his style. But one of the things that they had said about Steven Adams was, like, you could tell, like, unlike some other superstars that weren't really listening to the coach when they were like sharing something, he was just always super engaged, like a super coachable guy on the sidelines, just listening to whatever the coach had to say really intently. And I think, one is just showing the willingness to listen and being engaged and then saying back what you've just learned, but then also going and executing on that and just being someone that the fact that you have an advisory board is just a very tangible example of this, that shows that you're willing to admit you don't know everything, and that you're constantly on a path to learn more and improve yourself, improve the business, and improve the business for the people you're serving at the end of the day.
100%. I mean, there's no other way to be. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are other ways to be, and those are the type of folks that, struggle in the long run. There's a great book by Ryan Holiday called "Ego is the Enemy."
It's one of my favorite books.
I've listened to them all on audiobook. I've been meaning just to pick up a physical copy of all of them, but I mean, that the whole premise of the book is basically exactly what the title says. It's a bunch of stories that showcase what someone can accomplish when they don't let their ego get in the way, or the downfall of folks that do let ego get in the way of their leadership.
Yeah, I thought that there was a conversation with Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss at the end that I thought was really good. It was like a podcast basically, but they were just talking about people with dangerous egos, and like you just want to stay away from someone like that because they're just going to destroy everything in their wake, and they're so true. I mean, I used to have written, this is embarrassing, but I mean, I still have it. I probably should take it down because I haven't used it in a while, but I had a whiteboard in my bathroom that I would write things to motivate me on.
Sure.
So I looked at it, like a few times a day. And one of them was obstacle is the way, and another one was ego is the enemy. And so
Yep.
I think there's two other books he came out with too that are meant to be pretty good. There's Conspiracy, which I haven't read yet, but it seems fun. And then
he's written a bunch. Yeah, keep going. I might be able to fill in a couple
Courage
of the
is
gaps.
Calling is one I've been wanting to read that I heard about that I haven't gotten to yet. I purchased it on Audible. I need to read it.
Yep.
And then what is the other one? Like there's one other one that's meant to be quite good.
Oh, let's see. I'm gonna look them up right now. No. Come on. So let's see. Obstacle is the way. Ego is the enemy. Discipline is destiny.
Discipline is destiny. Yeah, that's the other one.
Yep. And then he just published Right Thing Right Now, and that's more of a book on having
that guy's
values.
So prolific.
Oh yeah. Well, he I've seen his system for writing books. Like, he has a bunch of note cards of stories from the things he reads, and he kind of sorts through them to ultimately put these books together and I think it's a great, like, he writes very timelessly. Like, he is very big into stoicism. In fact, one of his books is called The Daily Stoic. So he's constantly referencing Stoic philosophy, and the people he talks about in his books are anything from just the discipline that, like, Queen Elizabeth of England had, for example, to the discipline of Lou Gehrig as a baseball player relative to someone that he played with, like Babe Ruth, who was almost the opposite of what it meant to be like a disciplined player at the end of the day. Don't get me wrong, Babe Ruth was great, but one of the points he makes in the book, it's like, do you ever wonder what Babe Ruth, he was like loose cannon, didn't eat healthy at all. Like, there plenty of other, flaws. And he's like, it's cool to see. Don't get me wrong. It's awesome to see someone like Babe Ruth succeed, but do you ever wonder what it could have been like had they had that extra ounce of self-discipline? How great could they have been, if they had put those personal demons aside, if you will. So, it sounds like you and I could talk about Ryan Holiday all day long.
For sure. No, huge fan of Ryan Holiday.
I have no doubt some of your listeners are very familiar with him as well.
Yeah, no, he's great. I mean, and he makes these, I wouldn't say that like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is inaccessible, because it's very accessible, especially given that it was written like thousands of years ago. But like, I mean, The Obstacle is the Way is so accessible. Like, it's just, it's written in the, the parlance of our times. So,
I mean, I hate to say it, I've never actually bought one of the physical books. I've been meaning to, but I've listened to them all on audio. They're very easy Audible listens because the stories are engaging, they're pretty concise, and his style is just very well done. And he's a seasoned author, right? He's probably written over 10 books.
He had a ton of mentors too. I mean, he talks about that, and like the like the notes from his books. Like, I think Robert Greene, the guy that did the 48 Laws of Power, was one of his mentors, which is hilarious because like the message in the 48 Laws of Power is like the opposite message from like The Obstacle is the Way.
Yes. It is very fascinating, his list of, and he admits some of his mentors had flaws, right? Like Dove Charney, I mean, Ryan Holiday, I think, uh, I don't think he graduated from college. I think he left early to become a young executive at American Apparel when that company was really on the rise. And we won't get into it today, but their founder and I believe CEO at the time, Dove Charney, is just an extremely controversial
Oh, that's
individual
interesting. I know nothing
with
about
with
him. This is
with
interesting.
many personal flaws. But nevertheless, Ryan was still able to learn a lot from him, which maybe there's another macro lesson here. I mean, unless someone is just totally heinous, right? There's probably something you can learn from a lot of people, even folks that you don't
Well,
100% see
even if
eye to
somebody
eye
is
with.
totally heinous, though, like I would say that you can still learn from them, right? Like, I mean, I've had, people I've worked with and known throughout the years where I use them as an example of how not to be, and that was
Sure.
valuable.
Sure. No, I get that. But I mean, like you can draw a positive lesson from someone, even if you don't 100% see eye to eye to them, or even if you don't, have the exact same value set from start to finish. In
Yeah, well,
most
there's plenty of
cases.
people
Yeah.
like that where I'm
Yeah.
actually like having advisors that are dissimilar to me in terms of value and upbringing, because I feel like
Agreed.
it gives me perspective and makes me
Hmm.
smarter and helps with blind spots. But I mean,
It's
there's definitely counterexamples of how to be too that are useful in their terribleness, and you're like, wow, like that person is such a bad manager. Like this
Yeah.
is actually a great study because it's showing me the mirror of my poor management,
Yeah.
like traits, and like, okay, I got to minimize what they're doing there. I see that they did this. I've caught myself doing that before. I got to stop doing that as well. Like, okay, oh wow, okay, I think I've done that before too. Okay, good catch, So
You'll probably appreciate this as a fellow business owner. Kind of the way I describe that in a customer sense is one of my pieces of advice to fellow business owners or young salespeople, young customer service folks, any role where you interface with a customer basically is think about one of the worst customer experiences you've ever had, understand why it was a terrible experience, and do everything in your power to make sure you never put one of your own customers through that.
I
Like
love that.
and that, if whether it's delivering bad news quickly, I can think of a number of scenarios where I'm trying to think of the
It's
right
so
thing to do
important to
for a
deliver bad news
customer.
quickly.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, absolutely. And I just think what is the thing that I could do in this situation that would make it absolutely horrible? And I just I avoid that straight up, and I go to whatever solution is going to make the customer experience as positive it can be in the long run, even if there is some short-term pain to it.
100%. Now that's brilliant. I love that. I guess what are some of the cooler things, like, you have a lot of guests on Manufacturing Happy Hour. Like, what are some of the cooler things you're seeing in manufacturing with current trends? I mean, people have been manufacturing stuff for thousands of years, but, I mean, one of the great things about technology is that it's, exponential in terms of its growth.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing in the last 5 to 10 years that's got you excited, to be in manufacturing and to wear that identity?
Yeah, I'll give you the 5 to 10 year answer first, and then I'll tell you what I've been excited about in recent times as well. And both are a reflection on the total time period in which I've been doing this. When I started podcasting in 2017, 2016, technically, end of 2016, beginning of 2017, I was like one of less than a handful of other manufacturing podcasts out there. Making Chips, shout out to them. They were one of the originals as well. But it was like me and them and probably a couple other people that were around. And it was weird to be creating content in our industry. I feel like one of the first people to look at a platform like LinkedIn, to look at what, let's say, travel influencers were doing on Instagram, sharing videos, sharing really cool pictures of the places they were going. I'm like, okay, if this works in the travel industry and if this works in the B2C industry, why not we try to do this for the B2B space, right? Manufacturing is making stuff. There was the show How It's Made that was
Great
making
show.
manufacturing look cool for a long time. So I'm like, okay, So the photogenic aspect is there. I just feel like part of it was just the conversations we were having. We were talking about digital transformation and topics that are important, don't get me wrong, but we were doing it in a very dull way. I'm like, well, what would happen if we just approached manufacturing like it was supposed to be cool and talked about it, as if we're having a beer with one another, manufacturing happy hour style. So I started doing that, like I said, end of 2016, beginning of 2017. And it was cool to start seeing how by, let's say, 2022, once people were starting to go to trade shows again, the world was opening up post-pandemic, people were really starting to share content en masse. Like it was becoming the normal thing to share videos, to share photos from trade shows on LinkedIn. So I look back at that 5-year period where it's like, okay, manufacturers figured out how to tell stories in a B2B context. Don't get me wrong, there's still opportunity for improvement, but it is now the norm to see companies and individuals sharing their day-to-day experiences on LinkedIn and other platforms like Twitter or X, whatever you're calling it, than it was like eight years ago. So that's one of the cool things that I've really enjoyed seeing as a marketer and a storyteller. In the past few years, I'm enjoying seeing technologies that looked cool but may have not felt all that practical or not as proven. I'm seeing those technologies become ubiquitous. Autonomous mobile robots are a perfect example. They've been proven out. It is not the risk that it was, let's say, 5 years ago for a small manufacturer to invest in one of those because they just hadn't seen enough use cases yet. And if I'm a small manufacturer that only has so many capital dollars to spend, I might not be able to stomach that risk yet. But now, whether it's autonomous mobile robots, even cobots, for example, we have seen how they are making welding operations easier. We are seeing AMRs making warehousing operations easier. The proof is there. We've seen owners leverage those technologies to create more jobs, to create better jobs. Long story short, I love seeing technologies that were on the rise becoming more ubiquitous, becoming more mainstream. And I like seeing it in the context of small to medium-sized manufacturers that now don't feel the same level of risk in investing in those technologies for the first or second time like they might have a few years ago. So that's just me. And we could go the direction of talking about artificial intelligence and things like that. But
interesting to see that come up.
Yep. And admittedly, I'm continuing to learn more and more about that every day. But the reason I wanted to highlight, maybe what feels more like a basic example is that's what it takes to drive our industry forward. Not everything is going to be a leap and bound overnight, but we're starting to see manufacturing become cool again. And we're starting to see even the smaller manufacturers out there take advantage of the technologies that are available to them without needing to worry about whether it's going to put their business under it, to be blunt.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, to your point, you only have so much money to spend on CapEx.
Very true.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I mean, yeah, no, I think for me it's been pretty interesting to see it too. I mean, AI is a big one where I cringe even saying that because it's been so overhyped. But, I mean, it's, I don't know. We have real examples of, generative AI like doing cool stuff where it's like, even a cynical bastard like me can be like, okay, that's pretty neat. So.
I mean, one of the goals of manufacturing happy hour is really to take these technologies that feel overhyped and find the people that have very concrete applications of how artificial intelligence, for example, is improving their businesses. I think one of the most tangible examples I heard on the podcast the last year was from one of my old colleagues at Rockwell Automation talking about how artificial intelligence and the fact that we have large language models and GPTs now, leveraging that to collect all the information that's floating around a facility, for example, where you can tap into tribal knowledge that might be walking out the door sometime soon.
That's pretty awesome.
And I just look at that as a great example because, hey, you're using natural language to maybe determine what is the fault of this drive, where in the past, Larry, the maintenance guy, who's 63 years old, retiring 2 years, he would have needed to say, oh, well, when it's making that clicking sound, this is the issue.
That hum sounds like it's probably around 120 hertz. I bet it's doing this.
Exactly. Now you can get Larry's insights delivered to you in natural language, which I think is just one of the most, again, these don't always have to be the sexiest whiz-bang applications of technology, but when it solves what is ultimately one of our biggest problems in the manufacturing industry right now, the skills gap, the retiring, aging workforce, that's where those technologies really count.
Well, I mean, for sure. And as somebody that's written hundreds of pages of documentation that nobody's read, it's like, I mean, to make that stuff searchable, and just be able to scan it in. I mean, as a podcast host, I'm sure you realize like how immortalized you are by having that much content, like recorded. I'm
is
sure
nice.
It could be like 99% you at this point. That if you just scanned all the manufacturing happy hours in, we're like, what would Chris say in this situation? It's like probably it's what he would say.
It is pretty wild, all the information that's there that's been shared over the years on the show. I mean, that's one of the reasons the primary keynote I give is 10 lessons from over 200 interviews with manufacturing leaders, and you get the stories playing together, much like you would if you were writing a book at the same time. So it's been a privilege being able to do this and learning from the close to 300 guests that have been part of the show over the years.
That's awesome. As we kind of near the end here, is there anything you want to plug that you think would be a good thing to leave kind of our listeners and our viewers with?
Sure. I would say a big part of Manufacturing Happy Hour, I always describe it as it's a leadership podcast disguised as a manufacturing podcast, but beyond being something you can listen to on Spotify or watch on YouTube, it is a community and an event platform as well. So manufacturinghappyhour.com/community will take you to our private group of manufacturing leaders. It's almost like the Manufacturing Happy Hour fan page at this point. So folks that are listening to the show and talking about the show on a regular basis, that's where they hang out. But the other thing I would say is I've always got some events up my sleeve. I just came off of a 4-date tour where we threw parties and live podcasts in Kalamazoo and Indy and Columbus and Toledo. It was a great time. And, I do a lot of after parties at trade shows as well. So Automate, I'll be doing an after party there, depending on when this comes out and when people listen. But I'll give the timeless call to action here is manufacturinghappyhour.com/tour is where to go to always find out what events we have going on at Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Awesome. And I will say it was great to see you when you were in Pittsburgh. You should definitely follow Chris's tour.
Yeah, no, it's a good time. I'm glad we got a chance to hang out like multiple times this past winter, and this makes it 3 here.
It's been lovely.
Collaborative with Spencer Krause.
Looking forward to the 4th, Chris, and definitely going to be checking out more of Manufacturing Happy Hour. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thanks for joining us today. If you've made it this far, chances are you'll like other episodes too. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. Subscribe today to get notified when the latest episodes release and support the channel. Collaborative with Spencer Krause is sponsored by SKA Robotics. If you're in the market for elite field robotics expertise, please consider hiring SKA Robotics. They sponsor this podcast and solve some of the toughest engineering problems in the world. SKA Robotics can be found at skarobotics.com. Thanks again, and see you on the next one.